We're going to walk you through a few more of the details of Fulcro. At the moment, all we've been doing in the getting started, all we talked about was doing some basic DOM rendering. You need to know that, but not sufficient for doing very much. We've added a few things to our requires up here, and one of the things we're going to do is we're going to switch our Devcards into using Devcard Fulcro. And we're going to do this because that starts a complete freestanding Fulcro application in a card. And that'll let us show you more of the details. Now, what it wants instead of a DOM thing is it wants something that can be the root of your user interface. And so we're going to change this guy to be called root just for giggles. We no longer need a factory for that because this takes care of using a component itself. And if we save that, we should see it still works. I'm going to go ahead and reload. So this is one of the cases where reloading can be a useful thing just to make sure you've got everything. And yeah, that's what I expected. We're no longer passing any data in. So you see it just says hi now, but there's no name coming in. We still have the class name. I'm just going to get rid of that so it's not noise here. And we still have the italics. We get rid of that so it's not noise as well. Now, the thing that you're going to want to know pretty much immediately is how do I make this thing do something? And we're going to get right into that. So what we can do is we can give this card an option. So this first thing, the first thing is the UI component. We can get rid of this documentation. It's not necessary. Or is it? Actually, it is for that component. Oh, no, this is the problem. And then that's not necessary. Okay, so the first thing is the component you want to be your root. The next thing is what data you want to start in your database, and we'll talk about, you never use this pretty much. But you can. There are reasons to use it, but they're very rare, so don't worry about it. And this third option is just the options to the card itself. If you look at the documentation, it gives you, some information about what all you can put here. The main thing you want to put here to start out with is just inspect data true. And you can see we've got a full-blown running Fulcro application, but the only things that are coming in our database to start are the things that Fulcro adds there, what locale it thinks it's in, and what React key it wants to put on the root itself. This one is interesting, and we'll get to it in a minute. But let's go ahead and call this props, and then let's just throw in a, see, this is a CLJC file. No, it's a CLJS file. So I can say JS console .log props. And so now down here in the console, when that re-renders, you'll see the props are being passed in straight from the entire database is basically being passed in as props. So that means that we could put, for example, UI/locale right here, and now we would see, if we get it out of the props, if we pull the UI locale from the props, we'll see that. So basically, if we've not got any sort of state management set up through data-driven mechanisms, which is hopefully the reason you're here, that the entire database just gets passed to our root, and it can do with that as it pleases. So let's step into the next little bit, and that's how do we give Fulcro initial state in a component local way. It turns out we can give a map right before the body to give options to DefSC to tell it the kinds of things that we might want to do, and one of them is initial state. And the initial state is relative to the component itself. So this is just going to be for the root node itself. I'm going to put name in here. I'm going to save that. I'm going to switch this back to name. Now, these options statically change the class, and initial state only applies at app startup. And this card is set up for hot code reload while maintaining state. So this is not going to reinitialize the initial state database, what you're seeing here in the card, unless I reload the card. So if I reload the browser here, I should see now I've got name Tony in my initial state for the root node. So The database is a graph database. I mean, you don't see much of a graph yet, but this entire map is the root node, and it corresponds with the root UI. So now you can see how we can get some state in the database and then have that state come out through the props of a node into the UI. All right, so that's straightforward. Let's create another component here. Let's make a to-do item. And a to-do item is going to have this, and then it's going to have some props, and let's just make some up. So the props that we're going to want to send to a to-do item are maybe a database ID. Maybe we want to persist it. Maybe we want the item's label. We might want to know if the item is complete. Right? And those are things that, oops, I don't need colons on these. They're destructuring in props. And then I might have a specific way that I want to render these. So I might have these might be a list item, and of course of some class name. The ID I may not care about rendering. I'm probably going to want to render the label, and then I'm going to want to throw a checkbox in front of the label. It's going to have some things here. That'll be checked. It'll have a type of checkbox. It'll be checked if. Okay. Now, I'm going to comment out this card for a moment. I'm going to make a plain dev card for this, and there's a reason for that. To do item. And then I need a factory. And my convention is to prefix factories with UI hyphen. The reason I do that is very often you'll call the to-do item in your database something like to-do item, and this keeps you from having to try to figure out which name is which. You just know that UI hyphen means, oh, right, that's a React renderer. That's all I'm going to do for it right now. And we've already saw in the last video that we could very easily just pass this literal props. So I'm going to say that this item's label is buy milk, and it is not complete. So now I should see a card show up. Now, the interesting thing about developing these things in ClojureScript and Fulcro in general is that these are pure renderers. If you give them data, they will render exactly what you say. I'm trying to interact with this checkbox now. It won't let me, right? Because what I'm saying is that card should render a check to do item. So this is really interesting, right? We can write Devcards that then become essentially visual regression tests for what the different states of a particular item looks like. So for example, let's say I want to change this to do item so that I can also edit it. So typically we prefix things that are not persisted with a UI prefix. There's several reasons for this, but we'll go over that later. So I'm going to add an editing flag to my props. Right? I'm going to go ahead and say UI editing false in both these cases. And in here, I'm going to say that when I'm editing, this is going to be another input, whose value is going to be whatever the current label is. And again, with pure rendering here, that will force it to render exactly what I say. So let's say this one I'm editing. complete. Oh, if. How about an if? All right, so if I'm editing. Oh, and there's one more thing we need to do here, and that's that if we want UI refresh to happen with defsc, then we need to change the React key, or sorry, the key, yeah, React key on the top level element here, which, oh, we're not going to be fed because these are regular Devcards. Never mind. Yeah, so for the moment, our hot code reload isn't going to work on these because we're not hooked as full applications yet. But you can see if I reload the browser. Now, again, I'm trying to type in this field. It's not letting me type. Right, so I can see what it looks like to have an item that's complete that I'm editing, and so I can do just various, riff on this. So the item is not complete. All right, so it's unchecked. I might decide that this checkbox I don't really want to show unless we're editing. So maybe I would like, again, I have to reload the browser to get those to update. I might like it if the checkbox doesn't show up while I'm editing the item. Again, these aren't very interesting if to interact with, but they're interesting in that now, and this is a technique that I've used, I can actually write code that runs these in a browser automatically, screenshots them, records that as what it's supposed to be. I can eyeball it and say, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be, and now I can throw that in my CI server, and if these change how they look, I know that something's potentially broken, and all I have to do is visually glance at them again and say, oh, well, you know what, no, I intended to do that change, push the little button, copy the images over, and you get visual regression testing out of this mechanism where, right, as you try to interact with them, they will just render the way they're supposed to render based on their state. This is a really important concept, the pure rendering. In the next video, we're going to continue on this to-do item and show you how to actually make it interactive.